Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome back once again to our ever ongoing series on the glories of our most beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pashnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Yavishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're continuing with our mini-series on stimulation for ecstatic love, and this will be part 86. In this lecture, we will continue to discuss music and musical instruments used in devotional service, which can help to stimulate our love for Krishna. Now, the word Sangita is the Sanskrit term for music, and this term is formed by adding the prefix Sam, S-A-M, to the Sanskrit verbal root gai, G-A-I. Shastra says, quote, a musical performance consists of musical instruments, vadya, dance, nritya or lasya, and singing, gana. So, last week, amongst vadyas or musical instruments, we discussed the mridanga, and we will continue the discussions today as I came across some really interesting information about this very special drum. First and foremost, I came across an article written by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It was published in his Sajjana Toshani. It was volume 7, issue 2, published in 1895. And this article that he wrote, it was entitled Samalochana Mridanga Vadyar Nava, meaning a critique of the book called An Ocean of Mridanga Beats. He wrote a critique on this book, An Ocean of Mridanga Beats. And this book, An Ocean of Mridanga Beats, it contains lessons on how to play the mridanga drum. And in that book, the author gave a shloka on the title page. And the shloka is Sanskrit, but I'll give the translation. Those who do not know the quality of music and poetry are almost like animals without a tail. Those who do not know the quality of music and true poetry are almost like animals without a tail. So while such a statement can certainly be taken as true, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur presented a little bit of a different angle of vision. He wrote, in our opinion, the glories of music and true poetry are not properly described in this shloka, for when music is played on a suitable instrument, even animals in a forest feel great appreciation. Wow. For when music is played on a suitable instrument, even animals in a forest feel great appreciation. And he went on, since the time of Mahaprabhu, it is doubtful if there is anything more pleasurable to a jiva than the sound of the mridanga and the Manohar Sahi Sangita, which have become so prevalent in our times. Those who do not understand tala, rhythm, mana, tempo, raga, like main composition, or ragini, secondary compositions, can also feel supreme ecstasy simply by listening to Manohar Sahi Kirtans. Then he goes on with his critique on the book. He says, this book has been prepared in order to perpetuate the text of mridanga beats. We wish that those that do business with mridangas will, one by one, continually discuss this. So he commented, Bhaktivinoda Thakur commented on the opening statement in the book. Then he continues, Sri Narahari Shakar Thakur Mahashaya composed the following shloka in his Sri Sachinandana Ashtaka, which indicates the glories of the mridanga. Quote, Krishna saw that in Kali Yuga, everyone is attached to vice or sin. Thus he appeared in the form of Sri Chaitanya, who is an ocean of mercy. The sound tik-tan, of the mridanga seems to say, shame on them, shame on those men who do not accept him as Krishna. Beautiful, isn't it? Sri Narahari Sakar Thakur Mahashaya. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur quotes him. So we're reading this critique of Bhaktivinoda Thakur on that book. I was particularly curious about his statement that, again, since the time of Mahaprabhu, it is doubtful if there is anything more pleasurable to a jiva than the sound of the mridanga and the Manohar Sahi Sangita, which had become so prevalent. So I was wondering, what is this Manohar Sahi Sangita that he's referring to, which gives so much pleasure to the devotees? I'd never heard that term before. So I researched and I learned that, well, kirtan in Bengal developed through contributions from different poets, like Jayadev Goswami. Though Jayadev Goswami's works were composed in Sanskrit in the 12th century, they actually had a profound influence on later Bengali poets who wrote and composed songs about the love of Radha and Krishna, like Chandidas and Vidyapati, who lived in the 14th and 15th centuries, respectively. And all these poets explained the ragas and talas in which their songs were to be sung, but the actual style of singing prevalent during their time cannot be ascertained. They explained how their music, was to be played, but the actual style, it's not known today. And the present form of Bengali kirtan that we know so well, of course, was developed by the followers of Lord Chaitanya, especially Srila Narottam Das Thakur, who I was reading was well trained in classical music in Vrindavan. Now, the style of kirtan done by Narottam, remember Narottam Srinivas Shyamananda, the second generation, the original second generation, just after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The style of kirtan done by Narottam Das is called Gurun Hati. Gurun Hati. From that, Gurun Hati, that style, some of the direct disciples of Narottam Das developed a style called Manohar Sahi. That's where it comes from. A little like Narottam, but they changed it a little bit. They developed it, let's say, a little bit. Manohar Sahi, which I was reading was mixed with some local folk tunes. And this Manohar Sai style was actually practiced by very expert musicians. So that's the style of kirtan that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was referring to when he wrote, again, since the time of Mahaprabhu, it is doubtful if there is anything more pleasurable to a jiva than the sound of the mridanga and the Manohar Sai Sangita, which had become so prevalent, which was developed by some of the disciples of Narottam Das Thakur. It was just so wonderful to find this historic fact, how kirtan has evolved. Even before the time of Mahaprabhu, we were mentioning, then with the appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then Narottam, then his disciples. I was also reading that during the time of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, there were rigorous training centers for kirtan in the ashrams of Vaishnava gurus, whose students used to learn the techniques of music in these very rigorous schools. We don't have that. It's interesting. Later, unfortunately, these training centers, how to do kirtan, disintegrated, and gradually kirtan became more simple, like we have today. Of course, just recently, our beloved Bharahari Prabhu, my dear godmother, he's actually developing a kirtan training program online, which will come out very soon, which will, in the same mood of training devotees how to do kirtan, how to play the harmonium, how to play the mridanga, what are the melodies, what is the mood, etc. It's a great contribution that Bharahari Prabhu is making. So in those olden days, or we're talking about 400 or 500 years ago, two different forms of kirtan were practiced by Gaudiya Vaishnavas, two different types, namely Nam Kirtan and Lila Kirtan. Of course, in Nam Kirtan, the name of Krishna was and is today repeated by a gathering of devotees who, with simple melody and rhythm, while, in a temple or going on procession through the streets of towns and villages with mridangas and kartals, while singing Krishna's holy names. And Lila Kirtan, which was prevalent during that time, included the lead singer singing, but also stopping sometimes and speaking on different aspects of Krishna's pastimes. He would sing and then describe some pastime, especially the loving pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And some devotees nowadays are interested in reviving this type of Lila Kirtan as well. It's authorized. Of course, all this began with the appearance of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago. He himself made a very bold prediction how this chanting of Hare Krishna in various ways would spread. Prativiti achayata nagarari gram sarvata pachara hobe moranam. The words from his lotus mouth. He said, in every town and village, the chanting of my name will be heard. And as we discussed last week, such chanting, of course, along with the instruments like the mridanga drum, give great pleasure to pious people and especially to devotees of the Lord. You may remember last week we quoted our beloved Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's song from his Sudha Bhakata Charana Renu, Mridanga Bhajya Sunite Mana Abhashara Sadajhate Gora Bihita Kirtana Suni Anande Hridoya Nache. I just love this. When I hear the sound of the mridanga, in my heart, I always desire to join in the kirtan. And when I hear the bona fide songs describing Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, my heart dances in ecstasy. Nevertheless, although it's true that the pious, and especially the devotees, experience great bliss from such chanting and hearing the sound of the mridangas and the kartals, unfortunately it has the opposite effect on those who are adverse to devotional service, inimical to the Lord and His devotees. I was thinking, much like Arjuna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 36, he says, O master of the senses, Krishna, the world becomes joyful upon hearing your name, unless everyone becomes attached to you. Although the perfected beings offer you their respective homage, the demons are afraid and they flee here and there. All this is rightly done. It seems this has been going on since time immemorial. Devotees love it and non-devotees, they don't like. Now, a case in point, how not everyone likes the sound of Hare Krishna and the beautiful sound of the mridanga is, of course, the famous pastime of Chandkazi, 500 years ago, who ordered his soldiers to break the mridanga drums in a Sankirtan party ordered by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the streets of Navadvip. But there's another similar pastime, perhaps not as well known by devotees, that I would like to share today, concerning another Muslim ruler in Odisha, in Orissa. His name was Sher Khan, S-H-E-R, Sher Khan. Now, the principal devotee in this pastime is our beloved Shyamananda Prabhu, from the famous second generation trio we mentioned earlier, Narottam, Srinivas, and Shyamananda, who, if you remember the lectures we gave about those great personalities a couple of years ago, were trained up by Jiva Goswami in Vrindavan after the departure of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda from this world. They were second generation. So they were trained up by Jiva Goswami. And after their training, Shyamananda, he went to preach in Orissa with the help of his disciple Rasikananda to spread the glories of Namasankirtan. They heard from their gurus, and then they served the gurus by going out and spreading Namasankirtan. Now, while touring Orissa, Shyamananda Pandit, it's described, engaged everyone he met in the chanting of Hare Krishna. It is said that by his divine influence, practically the whole of Orissa appeared to be turning into Vaishnavism. Wow. However, as is the case, in one town, a very devout Muslim ruler named Sher Khan, again, he went with his soldiers one day to confront Shyamananda, who was going through this king's area, this particular town in which he lived, with an ecstatic kirtan party. And he approached Shyamananda. He stopped the kirtan. He said to him, "If you continue this chanting," he threatened, "I shall have you all chained up and flogged." Flogged is like whipped. So Shyamananda, he stopped the kirtan party, but the next day, he and all his devotees returned to the streets. Now the devotees, they were apprehensive at that time, but it's written about Shyamananda, a true spiritual warrior. It's written, oblivious to everything except Lord Chaitanya's order and the bliss of chanting Krishna's holy names. Everyone was like fearful, but he had full faith in the holy names and the instructions of the Lord. So he was oblivious to everything except Lord Chaitanya's order and the bliss of chanting Krishna's holy names. And he ordered the devotees, start singing again. And learning that Shyamananda was disobeying his orders, and the news spread to Sher Khan, he took a big group of soldiers this time and he marched to the place where the kirtan was going on. You know, they literally marched, 1, 2, 3. It gives a certain, if an army marches somewhere, it creates fear in the enemy. So he marched to the place where this kirtan was going on. And when they got there, he had his soldiers smash all the mridanga drums and tear away all the kartals from the devotees' hands. Just envision this in your mind. It's not just some story. It happened. It's what turned out to be a pastime. And they're tearing away the kartals and smashing mridangas and beating the devotees. But it's described, before the soldiers could do more damage, Shyamananda, from his heart, he called out to Radha and Krishna for help. It's said that Shyamananda's calling, is more like chanting, was like Prahlad Maharaja's chanting as he was tortured by his father, or Haridas Thakur's chanting as he was whipped in the marketplaces. These are historical incidents. Prahlad's calling out. Haridas is calling out with full faith. Hare Krishna. So Shyamananda was calling out like that. His call was fully transcendental. And as a result, suddenly all the hair and the beards of this Muslim king and his soldiers caught fire. And it's described that the flames quickly spread to their clothes. And it forced the entire army and the king to seek shelter by jumping, weapons and all, into a nearby lake. They're on fire. So they run, they jump in the lake. And then, humiliated before his subjects, Sher Khan and his men retreated to their palace, where the king hid himself in his quarters. It's described unable to comprehend what had happened and why. Now it even gets more interesting, all these past lives. That night, it's described, Allah, the name for God in Islam, Allah came to Sher Khan in a dream and angrily slapped him. Allah told the king that his name, Allah, and the name of Krishna were the same. And what's more, he said that Lord Chaitanya was his most confidential form. Wow. Allah. he told the king that Lord Chaitanya was his most confidential form. So on the following day, well, Shyamananda went back out. Can't stop devotees like that. On the following day, the king again appeared alone. It's described he walked alone to where the kirtan party was going on. Not dressed in all his opulent clothes with his crown and jewels and sword, but in a very humble way. He appeared before Shyamananda and his chanting party, without soldiers or weapons. And he fell down, dandabats. Dandabats means you fall down like a rod on the ground. He fell down like a rod in front of Shyamananda, and crying, and crying, and crying. He begged forgiveness. This was the result of sadhu sangha, association with devotees. It wasn't even in a favorable way, but somehow Shyamananda was kind upon him. And he begged forgiveness. He begged forgiveness. And right then and there, he stood up, and Shyamananda embraced him. And during that embrace, Sher Khan whispered in his ear, "Please initiate me into the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra." And Shyamananda Prabhu did just that. Stood back. Right then and there, he initiated him on the spot. There was no big fire, yagya, and throwing of the grains and the mantras. He initiated there on the spot. And that Sher Khan, he received the spiritual name Chaitanya Das. Your name is Chaitanya Das. And later, he became a very prominent disciple of Shyamananda Prabhu. He became a very prominent disciple. I was reading that, it's like, wow, the hair on my arm almost stood up. So it may be surprising that Shyamananda Prabhu gave him initiation so quickly there on the street. But there's a famous quote to this effect from the Tattva Sangara. Durlabhe Sadguru Namcha Sakat Sangha Upastite Tad Anutsa Yada Shlabda Sadiksha Vashvaro Mahan. If by chance or good fortune one gets a guru, it doesn't matter whether one is in a temple or the forest. If the spiritual master agrees, one should take initiation immediately without waiting for a suitable time or place. If by chance or good fortune one gets a guru, it doesn't matter whether one is in a temple or the forest. If the spiritual master agrees, one should take initiation immediately without waiting for a suitable time or place. Of course, in our International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we have necessary guidelines to assure the spiritual master that the disciple is qualified. But this is interesting to hear how, in some circumstances, this shloka may be applied. Hare Krishna. So my main point is we should not be afraid to go out and chant the holy names with mridangas and kartals. Remember what Lord Nrsimha said to the Chandkazi, who I mentioned earlier, sent his people to break the mridangas of the devotees in public. In the following verses, the Kazi himself is recounting that pastime. It's all in Adi Leela, chapter 17. Mora buki nakadiya gora svara bale, paldimo tamara mukha mridanga badale. Placing its nails on my chest, again Kaji's speaking, the lion said in a grave voice, "I shall immediately bifurcate your chest as you broke the mridanga drum." It appears the Kazi was there, actually. Mora kirtana manakaris karimu tora ksaya Anki mudi kanpi ami panabhara bhaya. You have forbidden the performance of my congregational chanting. Therefore, I must destroy you. Very, very much afraid of him, I closed my eyes and I trembled. The Kazi's thing. Bita deki simham pale aiya sadhaya tori shiksha dite kailu tora parajaya. Seeing me so afraid, the lion said, I have defeated you just to teach you a lesson, but I must be merciful to you. Se dina bahuta nahi kaili utpata tene shama kari na karinu prana gata. On that day, you did not create a very great disturbance. Therefore, I have excused you and have not taken your life. Aiche yadi punakara tabina su himu savam se tomare mare yavana nashimu. But if you perform such activities again, I shall not be so tolerant. At that time I shall kill you, your entire family, and all the meat eaters. Hare Krishna. So we're protected by the Lord because we're doing His work. He comes and He goes, but His devotees, the dear sons and daughters of the Lord, they take up the same mission of the Lord, so they get some special protection. Now, last week we briefly mentioned how overjoyed our Srila Prabhupada was upon receiving one of these mridangas we've been discussing in so many ways last week and this week as well. How overjoyed Prabhupada was. We just mentioned it, how he received a mridanga from India shortly after he had begun his preaching in the USA, and we gave many quotes how dear the mridanga is to Srila Prabhupada. Well, I found a detailed account of that particular pastime of Prabhupada receiving the first mridanga in the West in my dear godbrother Mukunda Maharaj's book, Miracle on Second Avenue. Everyone should read that book, Miracle on Second Avenue. It's been out for a while. And I thought it would be a most appropriate way to finish this lecture today, which is part 2 on the mridanga. Actually, I'll read the text in part as Maharaj wrote it. I think that's probably the best way to do it. He had the personal experience. It's really nice. A delivery truck pulled up next to me. Maharaj is speaking first person. And the delivery man said, "Hey buddy, do you know where the Hare Krishna temple is?" "Just over there," I said, pointing across the street. I watched him double park and unload a large wooden box. A guy named Murari, one of the newly initiated San Francisco devotees, came outside to sign for the delivery, and I ran across the street, my interest piqued. The first thing I noticed was the Hindi writing on the sides of the box. Other markings on the box indicated it had traveled from New York by train via Union Pacific, which was a delivery company at that time. "What is it?" Murari asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I hope it's what I think it is. Let's get something to open this." Several devotees gathered around me on the sidewalk outside the temple while I pried open the top with a claw hammer. Inside, nestled in a bed of well-packed Indian newspapers, was the drum we'd all been waiting for ever since the New York devotees had called us to tell us it had arrived in America from India. It was the real thing at last. I love that. It was the real thing at last. Murari and I lifted the box inside the temple, inside the temple, and unpacked the drum properly. It was cylindrical, sloping to a budge near the middle, about 3 feet long, its beautiful red-brown exterior covered with small reddish straps pulled tight around its circumference. One end was a lot larger than the other. Of course, the first time devotees are saying a mridanga. Then Maharaj said, or he wrote, "The Swami had told me that the drum was called a mridanga and that it was the forerunner of the tabla. If you cut a mridanga in the middle, he had said, and place each end upright, you have a tabla. Now, as I saw my first real mridanga before me, I saw that he was right. I tried banging the leather heads a few times. They resounded loudly, the small end high and sharp, and the large end rich and deep. Let's tell the Swami it's here, Janaki suggested. He should play it first. Let's tell the Swami it's here, Janaki suggested. He should play it first. Janaki and I went next door and took the elevator up to Prabhupada's fourth floor apartment. We knocked. Yes, he called to the door. Come. Swami, the mridanga has arrived, Janaki blurted out excitedly. Srila Prabhupada's eyes opened wide. It is here, he said. Yes, in the temple. We unpacked it. I will come in 1 minute, he said. We took the elevator down, so we'd be back at the temple before he arrived. But as we were opening the old elevator's door, we saw Swami already at the bottom of the stairs, heading out to the temple. He really wants to see that mridanga, I observed. Janaki nodded. Come on, hurry up, she urged. We followed him out into the sunny street and into the temple. I picked up the mridanga and handed it to him. He smiled broadly and sat down on the ledge that ran along the large front windows. As he felt the drum all over, my mind flicked back to the way the musicians at the recent mantra rock dance in San Francisco had fondled their instruments like a precious loved one, a priceless treasure, or the way a parent might hold their child. Placing the drum in his lap, the Swami played a few beats, delicately tapping the small end with his fingers on his right hand and striking the large end with his left palm. Then, without saying a word, he tore off a yard-long portion of his dhoti, his cotton dhoti. It was a substantial part of his dhoti, but not enough to expose his legs. This piece of cloth he wrapped tightly around the mridanga so that the pointed ends of the cloth met in a hard knot over the bulge of the drum. This must never come off, he said. It is necessary to protect the mridanga. The drum is called a khol in Bengali. It is made from earth. It will break very easily. Never remove the cloth. We all nodded. This instrument I have played all my life, he said. When I was a child, my father insisted that I learn mridanga from an early age. He would have let me play it all day, every day, except for my mother. Except for my mother, I would have missed school altogether. We heard last week how she complained. He paused, striking the drum heads again and again. Bring water, he said. How much? Janaki asked. A little, he replied. Janaki went to the temple kitchen and came back with a styrofoam cup, half filled with water. That's sufficient, Prabhupada said, reaching for the cup. Holding it with his left hand, he dipped the ring finger of his right hand into the water. I will show you how to take care of this mridanga, he said, never lifting his eyes from the drum. He turned the mridanga so that the large end was facing upward and was level with his chest. With the deftness of a lifelong drummer, he ran his wet finger around the edge of the drum head, dampening its small cream-colored margin. This you must do regularly, he said, with little water like I'm showing. He didn't explain why, but I assumed it was a maintenance technique to keep the application from eroding or cracking at its outer edges. Later, through following the Swami's watering instructions, I also discovered that regular dampening helped keep the heads taut. You play them as good sound comes out. Swami continued to test the sound of the drum heads, striking each end tentatively a few times while listening closely, his head cocked. Very good, he said after some time, and headed back to his apartment. After a few minutes, I followed him. I found him writing at his makeshift desk. Swami, would you teach me to play the mridanga? He looked up from his work. Yes, he said. When you want. Today? Get it, he said. Just bring it. I'll show you. I ran down the stairs to the temple and carefully carried the mridanga to the elevator, not wanting to risk dropping it in the stairway. He was waiting for me in his rocking chair, chanting on his beads. You sit here, he said, indicating the new rug on his floor. The drum sat in my lap. So Swami put down his beads and sat opposite me, cross-legged, close enough so that he could hit the drum too. Every sound, every beat on mridanga has mantra, he began. Always you must say the words of the mantra. The sound of the drum should sound like words. How can a drum sound like words, I asked. Watch, he said. You must strike the drum with a different portion of your hand for each beat. There's a special place on drum for each beat. Watch. He hit the drum heads and spoke these sounds. Kita-ta, kita-ta, kita. The small end he struck with his second finger, with his third, fourth, and fifth fingers locked together. The large end he hit with his four fingers held flat. You hear the sounds, he asked me. I think so, I said. Listen again. Watch, he said. First, kita-ta, 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 kita. Then, gita-ta, 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 gita. You see? I nodded. Now you do. Now you do, he said at last. I tried to hit the drum and say the mantra, but it was hard to do it at the same time. I closed my eyes and focused all my attention on playing correctly while speeding up. After some time, our session finished, and I went back down to the temple, carrying the mridanga very carefully all the way. Thank you, Mukunda Maharaj, for sharing that pastime where the beloved mridanga arrived in America for the Sankirtan movement to spread all over that country and the world. And thank you, Srila Prabhupada, for introducing us to this most beautiful enchanting instrument, which we are playing on your behalf all over the world now to spread the chanting of the holy names. So Prabhu, this ends our little series on mridangas. And next Friday we'll do another musical instrument, the veena. The veena. All glories to Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Krishna Shrine Kirtan Yagya. Shri Shri Gauri Thai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radharashama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Gauri Thai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Pimanandi Jaya Jaya Sisi Radhe Shyam. Hare Krishna.